Okay, boys and girls, you are now live. We are now live on Prehistory, a Traveler's Guide Christmas Day Horror Special. I am your host, Greg Nuneman, and today we're having a pretty light show. Today with just co-host Sean Markey, returning back after a months-long hiatus. Say howdy, Sean.
Hey, howdy. Sorry about the delay. It's been a wild year, but I'm very, very happy to be back. Hopefully I can do more than 2 shows in 2019.
Yes, I definitely agree, Sean. Your absence, well, it's been pretty heartfelt lately. Anyhow, for the guest today, we are once again welcoming back the author of the Primitive War series, Ethan Pettus, to do a follow-up to the Valentine's Day horror special, where we're going to follow up on some of the topics of the sequels, the anthology, comics, and all things else. Primitive War, say howdy, Ethan, and welcome back.
Howdy. Merry Christmas, and what did the pagans celebrate? Samhain? Kwanzaa?
Or we can just say happy holidays and happy New Year to all of our listeners.
Yeah, exactly that to everybody.
Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, I think okay. All right, if we're ready to start, I will begin with a simple question. Ethan, how's the second book, Primitive War 2, Animas Infernal, coming along? And have you made any sort of revisions or changes to it since the discussion we had on it during February's Valentine's Day special?
I've edited and revised it a few times already, and I'm still looking to release it in springtime of 2019, likely April, or potentially May at the latest. We're hoping to release the Bestiary Volume 2 at the same time as Primitive War 2 comes out, so that way, readers can immediately have the field guide to, illustrate all the species that appear in the full-length novel. The last, major changes I made to the actual novel were some kind of an extension of the climax, because, in some of my favorite novels, especially Michael Crichton's writing, he has a way of taking a climax, like the pivotal final scene, and extending it for multiple segments that create this kind of miniature roller coaster within the end of the book. And so, kind of following that, I've always admired that in reading. So there's about an extra 30 pages added to the end of Animas Infernal, Primitive War 2, and now it's at about 400 pages. I'm trying to make sure all the full-length novels stay within the 400-page range, but I'm also thinking Primitive War 3 could potentially be 550 pages to 600 at the most.
Whoa. Yeah, you heard that right, folks. Primitive War 3 just might be a paleofiction epic, going by that page count.
Yeah, that was kind of always the intention of Primitive War, was having an actual science fiction epic that is its own self-contained story with, multiple perspectives and interior dramas to explore through the, extended canon of the short story anthologies.
Okay, now let's segue on to the topic of the first anthology. Have there been any, updates on when the Dispatches Hunting of Stalker Force anthology will be released?
So, I've actually had the deadline set in my mind for the past few months of Christmas Day publishing, but I'm only human. I have a job and I have a life, so I have to kind of balance all the work I put into my publishing work. So I've just eased the deadline back to the first week of January 2019. That's the most important thing to me, is having it available within the first month of the new year for everybody to dive into, because it's only 200 pages. Actually, just shy of 200 pages, about 193. And it'll be plenty of time for people to actually engage fully with the book before the second full-length novel comes out.
From Christmas to New Year's, I think that's actually a better time to release it. And speaking about the contents of the anthology, just how many authors are in this anthology aside from the stories that you have written for it?
Okay, so the first short story anthology for Primitive War, the first volume of Dispatches, is only written by me. And yeah, so the first volume of Primitive War Dispatches is all written by me, but the next volume that we're going to release is going to include roughly 5 stories by guest authors. And then if I get enough submissions, then potentially the third volume of Dispatches will be all fan written, and I'm going to edit and revise all of the reader submitted stories, but I really want to engage the audience and see every potential angle that readers can see the Primitive War world from, because it's just like any other kind of fictional universe. Like you have Star Wars and Star Trek and Jurassic Park and Marvel and DC, and you have these full-fledged fictional universes that anybody can be involved with and come up with their own stories within. I mean, that's how I got my start writing, was trying to retell my own versions of Jurassic Park. And I want to offer readers the opportunity to do the same, to tell a Primitive War story the way they want to tell it, and showcase the ones that I think excel the greatest in ability or depth or humor or anything, really. There's so many angles you can take when it comes to dinosaurs, appearing in modern times around the world. You can tell so many stories, so many different ways. It's literally endless.
Yeah, that's especially true for stories in the kaiju fiction genre. You can set kaiju up in almost any genre, and if you're a skilled enough writer, you can just about make it work with any genre that you put your mind to.
True.
Yeah, I don't think there's a genre that couldn't be improved by the addition of dinosaurs. So,
okay, here another thing about the anthology I just thought of. What are some of the, in your opinion, and this might be somewhat spoilerish, what are some of the anthology stories that you think would really hook the readers into wanting to buy more, or what do you think, which ones are the quote-unquote standouts from the rest of the pack?
So would you prefer that I just tell you some of my favorite stories from the first volume of Primitive War Dispatches?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way of summarizing what I just said. What are your favorite picks so far from what's been written?
So there's the entire thing with Primitive War Dispatches Volume 1, The Hunting of Stalker Force, is that it's a serialized anthology of short stories. So the entire story takes place over the course of 1 year within the valley at the end of the first novel, Primitive War. And each story is a different event happening with Stalker Force, the special forces group that's tasked with quarantining, tracking, and hunting the Utahraptors in the valley from the first book. And they have other missions as well, so you get to see them going on all these different adventures, but their core mission never actually changes. They're always ultimately trying to find these Utahraptors and destroy them. So one of my favorite stories to have written, and one that I think will definitely is a two-part story called Ahab and Quetzalcoatlus. Some of the stories are into different parts. So just one called the Tyrant King Ahab and the Quetzalcoatlus is a two-part story. Stalker Forces is doing they're on a operation in the valley looking for the last two remaining Quetzalcoatlus. As they hunt for these two Quetzalcoatlus, they fly through helicopters through the floodplains. They get into an aerial fight with a Quetzalcoatlus. They get to witness Quetzalcoatlus battling Caprasuchus. And the story ultimately ends up with the men of Stalker Force inside of a cave within a mountain in a labyrinth of stalactites and stalagmites, trying to find the Quetzalcoatlus in the darkness. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of the intensity and immediately upping the ante with every story that I feel like people will probably remember with first Primitive War novel. However, since it's a serialized short story anthology, it's not like following a full novel where you have characters that you're constantly following every step of the way. You're seeing them, going through different experiences, weeks apart and months apart, and sometimes just as little as days apart. But you get to see how the characters are affected by the events that they go through, the adventures that they're engaging in, because at the core of this isn't necessarily a war novel the way Primitive War was a war novel. This is a novel about people and dinosaurs, people and animals, wildlife. It's about hunters trying to track down prey and animals trying to survive the encroaching human presence that threatens them. It's going to be a lot different from what people experienced in Primitive War. I feel like this is ultimately what I think a lot of people deeply want from paleofiction, which is just, people with dinosaurs in the wild, people hunting dinosaurs, being hunted by dinosaurs. It's not going down to the heart of every individual engaged in the trial and error. It's simply the trial and error. It's watching a ragtag group of hunters trying to track down and eliminate the most dangerous predators that ever walked the planet. You also get some interesting experiences with Sobek, the alpha Utahraptor of the last colony remaining within the valley from the first novel. He's kind of the recurring anti-hero throughout the book. The men of Stalker Force are always trying to keep an eye out for him because, you want to cut the head off the Hydra, so that's what their minds are primarily set on. But you also get to see this Utahraptor Sobek and how he engages with the humans and how he tries to circumvent their predation of him and his species. So there's a lot of fun segments that I've written with Sobek, where you get to see him outsmarting humans and engaging in behavior that would remind people of Cyclops from the first novel.
And I have to ask about Sobek. What was the actually challenge in writing a dinosaur character like Sobek? Did you take any inspiration from the novel Raptor Red by Dr. Robert Bacher and how he portrayed the Utahraptors of his book?
See, I've actually never read Raptor Red. I've always, ever since I was a kid, I've been deeply fascinated by the idea of dinosaur intelligence. It's fascinating to see modern day animals and the intelligence they exhibit and how they interact with one another. But when you're talking about dinosaurs, especially with Utahraptor, you're looking at something that would have an intelligence that is so far beyond what we currently see on our planet. It's not the same kind of intelligence as like a wolf or a crow or a chimpanzee. It would be something else entirely, because I imagine that it would have to, develop differently. And since we can never experience what that Utahraptor's behavior actually is, we can only go off of, interpretation. So I was really, really scared of anthropomorphizing Sobek, the Utahraptor, too much, just as I was worried about anthropomorphizing the Cyclops Utahraptor too much. Like, I think it's important to be able to give a dinosaur a name if you're going to pay attention to it, but I'm not trying to describe a person as a dinosaur. I know that I can never describe what Utahraptors would actually be like in terms of appearance and behavior and intelligence, but the Utahraptors in Primitive War, at least, I understand them inside and out. Their behavior and their appearance and their hunting tactics. And so it was really easy for me to just tell from the perspective of, not necessarily a first-person perspective of Sobek, but, the omniscient third-person narration that is kind of like examining what this Utahraptor is thinking and feeling as he's behaving, but not trying to be like, Sobek smiled and he, bobbed his head at so-and-so and, mentally communicated, hey, I saw you winking at my alpha female raptor or whatever. It's just like, an animal sees this, an animal reacts to this with this kind of behavior and does this to try to communicate his emotion or this kind of pattern of vocalization to communicate some understanding that doesn't involve, imaginary language. I wouldn't try to do like Walking with Dinosaurs, where it's like Sobek the Utahraptor said to Susan the Utahraptor, hey, let's go get the humans. It's more like Sobek the Utahraptor makes eye contact and utters low vocalization that communicates to the other Utahraptor to move closer or further away. Something simple like that. But I've never really written a lot from the perspective of animals, but it was a lot easier than I thought it would be for me to, immediately give prescience to this fictional animal and actually fully realize it within my writing.
Now, regarding how you do the other dinosaur characters, like the Tyrannosaurs, did you follow that same style of approach for the mother and father Tyrannosaurs and possibly even the Goliath Carcharodontosaurus in the second book?
As far as their perspective or their behavior?
Constantly a combination of both their behavior and even their personalities.
So the thing with most of the other species of dinosaurs is that primarily they exist as a way to continue the story, to actually explore and, provide additional meaning to the that are transpiring the stories, but they aren't usually the central focus in terms of perspective. It's usually the humans that it's the people that you're going to empathize with encountering these huge animals and these dangerous animals. And very rarely do I write a story that's focused on an individual dinosaur and how it's behaving, but I do that for the Utahraptors because they have that kind of intelligence to work with, I feel. But as far as like the other species, the Tyrannosaurus, the Caprasuchus, and Quetzalcoatlus, and Deinonychus, and Stygimoloch, and every other species that appears, I very rarely have to actually give their side of their experiences. I just have to be able to explain what they're doing, why they're doing it, and have the characters actually engage with that in a meaningful way.
And regarding the newcomer, Tyrannis, how many stories in the anthology will be featuring this new addition to the Primitive War canon? Will it have a bigger role to play in Animas Infernal?
So, I don't want to give anything away by talking about whether or not we'll be seeing Tyrannis in Animas Infernal. But I will say that Tyrannis appears in I want to say 4 or 5 stories. So, I mean, they're the central focus of a good quarter of the stories in the book. Cool. And even if they're not the central focus, their presence is known. The characters are aware of the impact the Tyrannis are having on the Utahraptor population.
Oh, that's cool. So, I was wondering about that Tyrannis and the Utahraptor dynamic. So, I know you described Sobek as kind of an anti-hero. So, does that mean these Utahraptors are going to be portrayed kind of as antagonists, almost like villains of certain pieces?
So, the way that works is the human characters aren't going to view the Tyrannis as, savage, piranha-like creatures the way that the Deinonychus and the Caprasuchus are. They don't look at the Tyrannis as crazy mobs engaged in feeding frenzies, and they also don't view them the way that they view dinosaurs like the Quetzalcoatlus and the father T-Rex and the mother T-Rex, which are animals that are, horrific and dangerous, but largely non-antagonistic unless you're in their way and they're hungry. But the Utahraptors, they actively prey on the human characters, so they try to actively destroy the Utahraptors and avoid them. But as far as the Utahraptors go, the Utahraptors don't actively engage with the humans as much in a predatory way. So the humans almost sympathize with the Utahraptors to a degree because the Utahraptors outcompeting the Utahraptors makes their jobs a little bit easier. They know that the Utahraptors aren't really posing a significant threat to human life, and so long as they're alive, they're making it harder for the Utahraptors to exist. In that sense, they're also kind of like anti-heroes to the Men of Stalker Force. But for the Utahraptors, the alpha Utahraptor Sobek, he can comprehend the danger that these dinosaurs present to his colony, his offspring and his mates and his hunting pack mates. It's not the same as this thing is evil. I have to do the morally right thing and destroy this other animal. It's simply that's a dangerous thing that's contesting territory and has to be fought or evaded. Has to be dealt with in some way. So that's the fun thing, is that nature doesn't have any kind of morality to it that we can actually investigate other than through the scope of human subjectivity.
Yeah, or to make another analogy, the rivalry that exists between orcas and great white sharks, which you explicitly reference in the Bestiary.
Exactly. It's predatory behavior and also intelligent ecological behavior, eliminating other animals that occupy a similar niche in the environment as you. Do you guys say niche or do you say niche? I usually hear people say niche, but I also hear people say niche. What do you guys prefer?
It's either or. It's both of them are valid.
Yeah, I think one is the kind of commonly used British version and one is the kind of Americanized version. Now, I don't know which is which, but I hear the two of them all the time and it seems both are acceptable, so I like niche myself.
Yeah, I like niche too, just because it makes me think quiche.
Quiche. Ah, darn it. Here we go talking about food again.
Yeah. It's only been a few hours. I'm already hungry.
But one really cool and novel aspect of their behavior was that they can kind of dig these kind of little almost burrowy style holes, and they kind of back themselves in and use the claws to defend themselves. I thought that was a really cool idea. Was that based on anything that you've seen in nature, or was it an idea that you came up with totally independently?
I mean, you see it in nature all the time. Not necessarily like an animal that hides in a hole and puts out 3-foot-long claws, but I was simply trying to think of what I would have done if I had those huge claws and I was, a big turkey-like animal trying to defend itself. Seems only natural. You try to get yourself backed up into a spot where all you can do is flail those giant blades. Anything that gets close enough is, not intelligent. So it was I was trying to think outside the box, because whenever I introduce a new species into the narrative, I want to actually do it purposefully and think very clearly about how this animal would behave, and not necessarily going with 100% what our understanding of the animal is at the time, but trying to actually come up with my own theories for behavior and additional features.
I suppose on that note, I also really liked, I don't think I've seen that being done before, was the Parasaurolophus, their ability to mimic predators and confuse Tyrannis. So a pretty good idea. Like mimicry is pretty common in nature, usually with color patterns, but I don't think I've ever encountered it through vocalization. Again, I'm just wondering, was there any particular creature that inspired that?
Well, thinking bird-like, I had read once that potentially a Parasaurolophus could vocalize because of its the crest on the back of its skull. It may sound like a didgeridoo. I'm a didgeridoo player, and with didgeridoo, it's kind of like the master of musical mimicry. You can recreate so many different types of animal sounds, and with didgeridoo, and you do see birds that can engage in vocal or auditory mimicry, and I've thought about it a lot because dinosaurs were on the earth for hundreds of millions of years, and if you think of modern day birds, they have such advanced communication, at least auditory communication. I was thinking perhaps dinosaurs could be capable of a similar feat, and if any of them, like Parasaurolophus, if it can sound like a didgeridoo, then it could probably sound like anything it wanted to,
In terms of iconic dinosaurs, obviously everybody, the big lug Tyrannosaurus Rex got a good run out in Primitive War. So we see we're introducing Carcharodontosaurus in the form of the Goliath. So that's a pretty interesting choice. And I suppose to people who aren't too familiar with paleontology and dinosaurs, at a glance, many wouldn't be able to tell a Tyrannosaurus apart from a Carcharodontosaurus. So what do you think Carcharodontosaurus brings to the table that can like separate it from T-Rex?
So, like with Primitive War 1, I was originally going to have Carcharodontosaurus and T-Rexes, but I decided against it. But with the mother and father T-Rex, you obviously have the themes of maternity and paternity, those instincts of your parents protecting you. It's what tells you that a T-Rex is, a good dinosaur instead of a bad dinosaur, because he's acting in an aggressive way to protect his nest and to, kill the animals that killed his infant. But with the Goliath, it's basically the scariest aspects of the father T-Rex, could easily topple anything that you could ever hide within to save your own life.
And since we're on the topic of the second book, what sort of role will the Carnotaurus have in this story?
They're not going to be a huge focus in the second novel. Like, they will appear. They'll appear just as much as Caprasuchus or Quetzalcoatlus did in Primitive War. But they're not going to, play a similar role as a T-Rex or Utahraptor.
So just like sounds like it'll just be one of the cast members of the story, so to speak.
Yeah, the Carnotaurus still have a decent amount of time within the book, though. They have some very intense moments, because you got to think Carnotaurus, lithe, muscular, fast, long legs, very blunt head, horns, bulldog teeth. Thing could just run you down and just flatten you, break your bones with its head. It wouldn't take a lot for a Carnotaurus to completely destroy a human body, so just keep that in mind. You will get to see Carnotaurus doing their thing to the human body.
Yeah, given how fast a real Carnotaurus could run, and the thickness of of their heads, yeah, it would be like getting hit by an enraged bighorn sheep, but a bighorn sheep with razor-sharp teeth on top of that.
Yeah, one that can put you through a wall.
So,
scary stuff.
Yeah, and these Carnotaurs are going to be not going to have any freaky superpowers like the ones in Michael Crichton's novel, where they could camouflage themselves like the Predator to render themselves almost invisible to human eyes.
Yeah, the Carnotaurus in the Lost World, I like the way they were written. They were really well thought out, but it wasn't that intimidating or exciting or thrilling to read. It was just kind of a momentary distraction while they're in the workers' camp.
Yeah, that was personally one of my favorite sequences in the Lost World novel, were any of the scenes with the Carnotaurs, especially when they make their big grand reveal in the book. But personally, for me, if we're talking the subject of the Lost World novel and favorite scenes, it would be the scene in the first time we're in the Rex nest, when Dodson and his cronies are trying to steal some eggs there. The tension in that sequence, very palatable, and this scene just shows the folly of listening to bad information. In this case, John Roxton and his rather idiotic hypothesis that T-Rex could only see moving objects, which was fatally disproven in this chapter, with George Basildon getting an arm ripped off and him being devoured for his troubles.
Yeah, you gotta love those little Easter eggs. Oh man, I just had something to say, but I completely lost it. Oh yeah. Okay, so we have a new artist on board. His name's Neil Kaskoun. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he's going to be doing a piece of artwork based off of every individual chapter within the novels. So that means that over the course of the next year, maybe a year and a half, he'll be doing about 40-ish pieces for the first Primitive War novel. Then he'll be going on to the second novel, and then he'll be going on to the third novel, and potentially the short story anthologies as well. Wow. And we also have Wyn Lacabra on board, and he's handling additional concept artwork similar to what Raph does. Their styles aren't exactly the same, but Wyn is still an incredible artist, and so is Neil. Like, honestly, the whole Primitive War creative team, all the artists that are involved in the process are doing an amazing job, and I'm incredibly grateful to continue working with them. So there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out next year. I think we have about 3 or 4 more pieces planned based off of the Hunting of Stalker Force, and then after that we'll be shifting the artistic focus solely to Animas, Infernal, and the second volume of the Bestiary.
Oh, I had seen a post a while back alluding to a possible art book called Primitive Gore, featuring some of the more violent Primitive War illustrations. Is there still plans to release like legit art books with that title of Primitive Gore?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We may not end up actually calling it Primitive Gore. That was just kind of a joke between me and Bruno Hernandez, the artist. But we do want to continue doing that series of artwork because obviously we don't want to have every artist that we are involved with to be making hyper-violent artwork. But Bruno, you know, he's a bass player and vocalist in a death metal band called Raper down in Chile. I'm a huge death metal head, and I also love horror movies. So, you know, we both want to shine a light on some of the more heinous and disgusting and violent moments in Primitive War. And so we still are working on it. We have the first 2 pieces out now, and I believe he's working on another piece, which is the Father T-Rex in the first novel.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool. Do you still have any intention on potentially hiring more artists for the Primitive War series going forward, or taking commissions from some of the artists that I have actually recommended on Facebook?
So, since we already have about 8 people involved in the project now, maybe 9, as far as artists go, it's kind of hard to, you know, reach far and wide and get every artist on board that I would like to bring into the project. But the thing is that we're always open to new interpretations of the dinosaurs that we create. Even different forms of artwork, like not just digital paintings, but also, you know, pastel work, like what Neil does at times, and black and white illustrations like what Bruno does. And we want to invite any and all interpretations of primitive war dinosaurs. So, yeah, offer's always out there for anybody interested.
And like I said, I've mentioned my friend Gabe, who's done incredible work that you have seen posted. His prices are quite good. I think he would provide a very cool, somewhat different interpretation to your dinosaurs. But there's also another artist I have also just recently commissioned that I think you would probably like. His name is Chris Treves. He just completed a recent submission for my Nessie panel for G-Fest. So I really recommend him because he has some experience drawing Jurassic Park dinosaurs, which would go well with Primitive War based on it being inspired by Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I'm always open to it. Right now, most of my focus is on getting all of the artwork for the Hunting of Stalker Force prepared for publication. and getting the Bestiary Volume 2 out next. But, this is something that I plan to continue doing regardless. Even when all 3 novels are out and all the spin-offs are out and everything else that I can think of is out regarding it, I'm still going to try to continue bringing in different artists to be involved in the process.
That's pretty cool. I think it might be. I have an idea actually. How about an art contest of sorts to encourage, fan participation for Primitive War?
Yeah, I've actually discussed that before with some of the other guys as well. But I think the primary thing I want to focus on right now is the writing contest that I have going on for Primitive War Dispatches Volume 2. Accepting roughly 5 short stories from readers set within the Primitive War storyline. In case anybody listening is interested in getting in on this little competition, the stories have to take place between the years 1970 and 1975, and they can take place anywhere in the world so long as it's, so long as it can make sense that the animals from Vietnam could get to it. So those are pretty much my only parameters. The setting, and it has to make canonical sense, like it has to involve species that we're seeing in the Bestiary Volume 1. But other than that, those are about the only specifications that I have, and the deadline for that will be announced in the future, but consider this an open going to pay for the winning submission so that I can have those stories printed in a future volume of Primitive War Dispatches along with all of my stories that I have written. The next volume of Primitive War Dispatches is going to focus on random encounters between people in the world and the dinosaurs and other prehistoric wildlife that has been migrating from Vietnam. So that's why I say it can be literally. So it'll be a lot of fun to see what people submit. I've already had maybe 3 submissions so far, so clock's ticking. If anybody wants to hop on board that, and if anybody wants to submit any more Primitive War artwork until I announce any other kind of contest, I encourage all artwork.
So yeah, speaking of other Primitive War material, how far along is the Primitive War comic that Babisu Courtis is working on for you?
So Babisu is pretty consistently busy. I can't really promise any kind of deadline for that because we're trying to go a different route with the Primitive War comic. We want that to go a much more professional route. You see, I self-publish all of my own work, but for this, we want to actually get it, picked up and distributed.
To sum up, some of the stories featured in the first anthology will be illustrated in the comic series, in the Primitive War comic, correct?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming the titular Hunting a Stalker for story is going to be in the comic itself.
Yep.
So that means we'll get to probably see Tyrannis in the comic itself.
So we already have the first issue of the Primitive War comic, and it's currently just in the final stages of being lettered and inked by Babisu. And it ends. It pretty much sums up the events of Primitive War and immediately leads off into the first volume of Dispatches, where you see Stalker Force attempting to quarantine the valley, and you see the Utahraptors already preparing to make their great migration across the earth.
So, any chance that there will be scenes set in, like, say, the United States or in the Western Hemisphere in the second or possibly in the third book, or anything else going forward?
So, Primitive War 2, Animas Infernal takes place in Angola during the Civil War for independence. The third Primitive War novel is going to truly be a science fiction epic because it will take place across the entire planet over the course of years, and America will be featured in it. But I'm not going to explain more than that, because got to keep it cryptic, you know? Got to keep it secret.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Don't lay out all your cards before you've even started the manuscript for part 3.
Yeah, basically, Primitive War 1, 2, and 3, the overarching narrative between all 3 novels, I've had it planned out from beginning to end since I was writing the first novel. Like, when I started writing the first book, I knew how I wanted the third one to end. And so it's just a really long walk, and it feels like slow progress on that walk, but I'm still doing the walk regardless. So far we have Primitive War, now we have Primitive War Bestiary Volume 1, now we're about to have Dispatches Volume 1, and then next year we'll have Primitive War 2, and then the Bestiary Volume 2, and potentially Dispatches Volume 2. I already have 100 pages set aside for the second volume of the Dispatches Anthology. And that's the one that I want people to submit stories for, because that's the one that's just random encounters of dinosaurs. That's all you really need, you know? Just what kind of story can you tell when you have a dinosaur to work with in modern times?
Indeed.
So, yeah, it's going to be exciting.
And so, I remember back during our first interview talking about how Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom would have turned out. 6 books under my belt by the end. Well, yeah, that's going to be pretty cool. 6 books in a row, that's not half bad for a series that's not, like, what, a year old at most?
Yeah, Primitive War 1 came out April of last year.
Yeah, I remember that. And also, I remember in February of this year, we were discussing Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and how you said it wasn't going to be good. Well, now that the movie's had its run in theaters and it's on home video, and if you've seen it, what are your overall final thoughts on Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and the possible future going into Jurassic World 3?
So I think I've been asked that question so many times. I don't know if I'll ever have truly final thoughts on it, but my feelings on Jurassic World have been relatively unchanging. I feel like I just be proven wrong, and that Jurassic World 3 may be what turns it around, because it'll be the first time that a Jurassic series has been focused on one complete trilogy rather than, you know, a movie and then a sequel and then a sequel that's kind of unrelated to everything else. So I feel like, honestly, Jurassic World 3 probably has the best possibilities, because it's the only ground that hasn't been truly explored yet with Jurassic Park. I don't know how far they're going to take the hybrid dinosaurs. I know they said that they were done with that, but Fallen Kingdom just kind of failed on so many levels for me, at least from a storytelling perspective, and the overuse of homage, but homage that doesn't have any sincerity to it, just homage for the sake of getting your attention and saying, you remember this, right? Right? You remember that happening in the first Jurassic Park, and you remember this line, and you remember that shot, and you remember this action, and you remember that dinosaur pose.
Yeah, there's a word for that. It's called fan service. And when fan service is done poorly, it can ruin your movie quite well. But when done well, it can make it very entertaining.
Yeah, and I feel like... Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Sean?
Oh, no, I just unmuted my mic. Carry on.
Yeah, so the thing with Fallen Kingdom is, I think I share a lot of the same opinions as other people, or at least critics. Like, I can say so many things about the writing and themes that aren't truly explored, and all the plot issues that it has. And I can complain about the CGI. I can complain about so many things regarding this movie, but I guess the thing that sticks with me the most is, you know, I grew up with Jurassic Park in a way that a lot of people have, but it's a very strange fandom to be a part of, because I remember growing up, like, Jurassic Park wasn't really like the huge entity that it is now. Like, it's always been there, but like after Jurassic Park 3, all the way up to like maybe 2010 or 2012, actually, you know, from Jurassic Park 3 all the way up to like 2014 or 15, I barely ever saw anything related to Jurassic Park. Like, there wasn't really much merchandise out. There weren't that many people talking about it, but it's kind of a universally accepted thing that, like, you know, Jurassic Park is part of most Westerners' childhood at this point, at least in this generation. And I'm only looking at it from the perspective of somebody that was, you know, on board with the series from my childhood all the way up to now. And this was the only time that I ever saw a Jurassic movie in theaters where I didn't enjoy it. Like, I didn't enjoy the experience of watching it. I didn't feel good seeing what was on screen. It makes me think of that joke in South Park where George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are DPing Indiana Jones. And
Yeah, from South Park.
Super, yeah. Like, that's kind of how it felt. It was just like, you're going to make my childhood dance on screen right now, and I'm going to pay you money for it, and I'm going to feel violated for it.
A little crude, but some fans have legit, you know, felt that way. For me personally, some other people also noted this. Yeah, Fallen Kingdom, in the sequence taking place during the second act, after the dinosaurs are off the island, it felt more akin to the novel Carnosaur, and even to some extent the first Dino Crisis game.
Yeah, I've never read Carnosaur, but I've heard people talk about it, and I know that I think it takes place in a guy's mansion, or like a very, you know, wealthy estate.
Yeah, part of it, yes. That's where the dinosaurs are contained initially before they're released and go on a countrywide rampage.
Yeah. Also, it feels weird talking about Jurassic World, because it feels like everything that I could say about it has already been said before. But like, it definitely feels like two movies that were just like mashed into one. Like, they took the Lost World plotline and then threw raptors in the kitchens.
Yeah.
And whole Sticky Moloch busting through the wall and running into the auction and all that. Like, I was really rolling my R's super hard at that moment. I just couldn't get through it. Like, I sat and watched the entire thing. I haven't seen it since. I haven't watched videos of it since. I haven't looked at merchandise of it very much since. You know, I've just stayed away from. You know, I think I honestly would find something enjoyable if I were to watch it a second time. Like, it's got dinosaurs. It's Jurassic. I'll always find something enjoyable about it. I'll watch it again in the future. It's just, you know.
Yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker.
I know exactly how you feel, Ethan. I felt very similar about the first Jurassic World movie. In fact, when I first saw it, I just had no real desire to check it out again, you know. But then as time went by and it came out in DVD, I kind of watched it one evening, and it almost works kind of like as almost like a weird parody of Jurassic Park, where you just have to kind of set. I kind of view it as if it's living in this weird alternate reality of Jurassic Park as opposed to the exact same universe. Because when I look at Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, and you see there's that scene where Chris Pratt has been tranquilized and he's escaping from lava with a technique which is very similar to the Monty Python sketch Ministry for Silly Walks. You're kind of looking at going, how can this be the same universe as the original Jurassic Park, which, despite being sci-fi, a bit fantastical, it was still relatively grounded in reality. So, like yourself, I haven't actually revisited Fallen Kingdom since I first saw it, and I've no great desire to, but I'd say when I get over myself a bit and do watch it again, I'll probably just enjoy it as nonsense, really. But at the same time, there's a lot of movies out there, blockbusters, nonsense movies like Pacific Rim or Transformers. I think with Jurassic Park, the benchmark was set quite high the first time around. A lot of people will defend movies and say, oh, just switch your brain off, and I was like, that's all well and good. Like, there's a lot of movies you can do that for, but I just think after the first Jurassic Park was so well done, I think it's not unreasonable for the audience to maybe just ask a little bit more of our filmmakers.
Yeah. I honestly feel like if the next movie doesn't do enough to turn around the sinking ship, then all that'll be left is to reboot the series in another decade and hope people still like Jurassic Park by then,
I actually have cautious optimism about Jurassic World 3, because I think, there's a lot of awkward world building that they've gone through, and hopefully they can come out the other side. Just a recent interview with Colin Trevorrow on Jurassic Park Outpost, that website, he was talking about how he wants to kind of make JW3 a bit more of a science thriller, kind of akin to the original book, which is promising. But I suppose we've heard it all before. Similar things were said about Fallen Kingdom, and it became a bit of a mad cartoon movie in the end after the producers got their mitts on it. But just certain things that the way Trevorrow has been talking about, he says he doesn't want dinosaurs attacking cities. I'll check it out. Like, I'm a dino guy. I'll check it out when it comes out in the cinema. So cautious optimism. I think until they turn around and adapt a Primitive War movie, they're probably going to be the best we've got on the silver screen for the time being.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I wish they could have gone the route as like the Apes trilogy, where they brought a series back, they rebooted it, they excelled at it, they made it its own thing, and still paid homage to the originals. And with what we got with Jurassic World, it feels like Universal Studios looked at the Chaos Effect toys, said that looks cool, and then they just had a committee make a movie around that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of ran with that idea, and it's like when you're running with an idea that was from a cancelled toy line from over a decade ago, it's probably not the greatest thing. But hey, that's, I suppose, people are always asking, because like I've run a show called about the history and dinosaurs and movies, and people always ask at the end, someone will always ask, what's the next film franchise? And I suppose I'm probably licking your boot here a little bit, but I have mentioned Primitive War as being a potential there. Have you had any I'm always going to ask you this, have you had any discussions or inklings into possibly some form of on-screen adaptation in the pipeline?
I mean, if that were the case, I'd probably have to sign an NDA first, which would mean that I wouldn't be allowed to talk about it, or else I could be blacklisted for it. But, nothing yet. Just, I think it'd probably be more likely to happen if I had the entire trilogy of novels under my belt first, because, I don't think anybody would want to invest in a property that hasn't been fully realized yet, unless they want to fill in the blanks afterward. But, Hollywood doesn't really have enough creative gumption to take over another property.
It's pretty fair. So I suppose No news on that. So I suppose if you could maybe give us a bit of what I'd love to pick your brain about is so the Primavora Bestiary Volume 2 is on its way. Are you able to reveal any of the brand new dinosaurs we're going to get that we haven't seen before?
Oh, so we're getting Suchomimus.
Oh!
Yeah. We're also getting Giraffatitan, Pachyrhinosaurus, Ankylosaurus. We're seeing the Utahraptors return, but their story has continued. You'll continue to see their story change over the course of the entire trilogy. They'll always be there. They'll always be surviving.
I have a quick one here. Any chance of new Dromaeosaur species appearing in the series going forward, like, say, Daikaiju-Raptor, Kilobator, or the even more bizarre Utahraptor from South America?
What was that species of raptor that is essentially like a giant oviraptor? Is that Megaraptor? No, it's not Megaraptor, is
Gigantoraptor.
Yeah. So definitely want to bring that big boy in for the third book. Say that much.
Gigantoraptor was a type of oviraptor dinosaur, so not technically a dromaeosaur, but still something that's not too dissimilar.
I just didn't want to tell you no right away. You know.
Well, I think that's.
I got my Utahraptors, and I got my Deinonychus, and I got my Sinornithosaurus. So that's all I'll reveal for now in regards to dromaeosaurs. But in the third novel, I may get around to bringing in another species.
Cool. I was going to press on the point of Sinornithosaurus, but I think that might be something we could save for another interview, because I think we've just gotten ourselves a Time Traveler's Guide exclusive there. Some new species reveals. Pretty chuffed about that.
Yeah.
I think I remember some of these being mentioned during the first interview. I know Suchomimus, Pachyrhinosaurus, Anki, and the Goliaths were revealed back during the first interview, but this is just a real explicit confirmation on top of the artwork that's already been released of the Carnotaurus and Carnotaur, at least from Bruno and some of the other artists.
Yeah, but that also doesn't cover next bestiary, because the bestiaries will cover bestiary volume will cover the novel that preceded it and the short story anthology that goes with that book. So we'll have more species as well, but
yep,
real too many of them yet. But just off the top of my head, Allosaurus, Gigantoraptor.
Ooh, Allosaurus.
Oh yeah, I have to bring in Allosaurus.
Of course, it was the other big popular theropod that's been featured in many Hollywood films and whatnot. It'd be kind of odd not featuring Allosaurus in some sort of popular work of dino fiction.
Yeah. Also, Manjungasaurus is one that I've been wanting to unveil for a while.
the Madagascar cannibal, as some people might call it.
Yeah. And I've been wanting to feature a certain underwater predator, but it's just a matter of how to reveal that species. But that is another goal as well.
An underwater predator, we're talking like a marine reptile of some kind?
Maybe.
Well, you've got a whole plethora of animals to work with. Mosasaurs, pliosaurs, and heck, even plesiosaurs to work with. But if you're going for realism, what you tend to do, your best bet for a marine predator is going to be either a type of pliosaur, a marine crocodile, or any number of mosasaur species. But a mosasaur would be kind of tacky since Jurassic World has one already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, believe me, I wouldn't try to follow that design that they created, because I just don't really have any interest in that. I like unique, I like bizarre ways to have people get eaten, you know? I don't want to just have something big that eats you in one bite. There's no fun in that.
And on that front, there are actually some mosasaur species that are around 20 to 30 feet long, and some of them that actually might have potentially been inclined to go in freshwater that could add for some creativity involving these animals. One species, I believe, that was freshwater is called Goroniosaurus, found in Africa.
Something that I've been thinking about is Dunkleosteus. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Dunkleosteus. Yeah, the armored, the canopter from hell from the Devonian period, fossils of which are prevalent throughout the Devonian Shale in the Cleveland area of Ohio.
Oh, nice. I'll have to take the couple-hour drive up there to dig around. Don't tell anybody.
I'll tell you, that Dunkleosteus is super popular with kids, and I know it's cool now. I don't know where they're all hearing about it, but man, they are big into that bad boy.
Ever since I was a kid, like looking at encyclopedias, anytime I'd see its skull, its jaws, its teeth, just immediately, it's like, nope, not worth going into the water if that thing exists or ever existed. There's no point. Why would you go into anything that they could live in? It's terrifying.
Yeah, the dunk would be like having a great white shark, but instead of having normal teeth like a white shark, you'd have a fish that's heavily armored, and you have these scissor-like protrusions on its jaws, and the way it dragged in prey by creating like a mini vacuum of suction that brings prey, and then it slices and dices it into bloody chunks. That would be definitely amp up the gore factor big time.
Yeah. It's funny some of the requests I get for species of dinosaurs that people want to see, because I'm always open to new dinosaurs, but sometimes the suggestions are kind of hard to work with, because it's like, if you, like for example, when you said Daikaiju-Raptor, it's like Utahraptor and Daikaiju-Raptor, very similar size. I would imagine they would have much different hunting capabilities and behavioral attributes that could be explored, but
yeah, on second,
I want to focus on
yes, on second thought, I think Daikaiju-Raptor should be probably scrapped, because it would be almost too similar to Utahraptor, given that it was quite large, and in actuality, it was a contemporary of T-Rex in real life.
Yeah, but I'd say rather than going with like duplicates, almost like dinosaurs that are so close that they're almost occupying the same niche, I want to focus on creating rich, diverse environments with different niches filled with unique species that can do uniquely terrifying things to people,
Yeah, and speaking of some, I actually thought of an idea. Maybe different parts of the world in your series could have an apex predator, a top large theropod predator that would be not the same in other parts. So like Vietnam had the Tyrannosaur as the top predator. Like maybe North America, you could go with perhaps something else, like maybe Acrocanthosaurus in some parts of the country, or
Acrocanthosaurus for sure. That's always been one of my favorite dinosaurs of all time, and I should probably mention that they will also be in the third novel.
Oh, now we've got ourselves a spoiler, guys. We've got a confirmation for a dino in book 3.
Yeah, there's no way that I couldn't use Acrocanthosaurus, because when I first started writing like Jurassic Park stories, my favorite dinosaur to feature was Acrocanthosaurus, just because when I was younger, it felt like the best of both worlds, like a dinosaur similar to like a T-Rex or Carcharodontosaurus, but with a similar sail as Spinosaurus, and it's just such an intriguing animal to look at, but it's also very terrifying.
Indeed.
It'll be fun to play around with the design of that animal, though, because it's hard for me to just go with like what is currently accepted as scientifically accurate. I always try to go like a little bit beyond that and get into the realm of the weird and the alien. get into that all your yesterdays territory, if you know what I mean.
Oh yes, I'm familiar. I've read that book, and Sean is probably familiar with that work too. All Yesterdays.
Yeah, it's one of my, if not my favorite dinosaur book, just because it's an eye opener to, gosh, it's the more we know, the more we realize the less we know about long extinct prehistoric animals. And particularly eye opening was that section towards the end where they said, well, what would happen if we were to recreate the animals of today just with their bones, and the results are utterly horrifying.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier this Facebook group that I'm a member of, Anthology Coprolite posting, and they post so many memes regarding current reconstructions of Spinosaurus because there's been so much contention over how they actually appeared, from quadruped to duck-like to giant behemoth walking the earth with a killer set of arms and a giant crocodilian head, like in Jurassic Park 3. It's gotten to the point where like this group on Facebook is making memes about the interpretations of Spinosaurus from like all your yesterdays, where it's like Spinosaurus, but it has a trunk on the end of its snout, and it's got a giant hump instead of spines, and it's covered in hair, or it lives underwater like a seal. It's just, ridiculous interpretations, but it's just a matter of like being on a sliding scale where it's like on one end you have scientific accuracy, and on the other end you have speculation, or at least creative speculation, and you have to be really careful how far on one end of the dial you go, because sometimes it turns out that the dial is going in the same direction. Like, Michael Crichton making up basically Utahraptors before they were even discovered. Kind of like, that was by chance that he used his creative license and actually accurately predicted something. But when it comes to like the arguments that I see regarding dinosaurs being scaled or feathery, or this interpretation of it physically and that interpretation of its anatomy, I feel like you can't really cater more to one perception than the other. You have to go with your gut and go with what is the most unique and solely your creation as far as an animal goes. Because if you try to just go for 100% accuracy all the time, give it like 5 years, you'll probably be told that you're wrong. Like when I wrote Primitive War, when it was still just a story called Hunted, people thought that T-Rexes were completely covered in feathers. And now you have something like Saurian, where they have this evidence of Tyrannosaurus being scaly, and now that's pretty much all I hear about with Tyrannosaurus Rex. But a few years ago, it was all T-Rex was feathered, T-Rex was feathered, T-Rex was feathered. Now it's T-Rex is scaly, T-Rex is scaly, T-Rex is scaly. And I wouldn't be surprised if that interpretation changes again in a few years, or for all we know, in a few months. Dinosaurs they're such an intangible thing for us now, just because all that's left are fossils and imprints. And I'm not the kind of crazy person that's going to deny everything that I'm told by a paleontologist. I work in the realm of fiction. Like, I write fiction books. I don't write, non-fiction books. I'm not writing biographies or peer-reviewed articles. I'm telling stories, and I want to tell stories about dinosaurs the way that I want to describe them. So, I don't know. I try not to feed too much into the the accuracy as much as most people might like me to, because why do something that can be wrong in a few years when you can do something that can be entertaining forever? So long as it's not like trying to pass it off as fact, like, oh yeah, Dilophosaurus totally spit venom and had a frill. It's like, no.
Or this fast one where pliosaurs were the size of blue whales, which was obviously a load of hogwash. Not gonna mention any authors that use that trope.
Yeah, I'm guilty of some of the same creative license that right next beside Jurassic Park, but that just comes with writing. If you want to tell a story that is about how dinosaurs are currently understood today, and every time a new piece of evidence comes out that counteracts that, if you want to go back and edit that book and republish it every time that happens, be my guest. But I'd rather write a story with relative permanence and of depth than try to religiously follow the dog. Just to simply put, if you want to update anything, do it in your sequel books. That's when you incorporate updates and new scientific information. You don't go back and edit an already finalized work to include new updates, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, which reminds me, that picture of the father T-Rex with no feathers on it. You explained that was actually a molting cycle. Was that like a compromise of sorts in response to the Bell et al. Paper from 2017 on the Tyrannosaur integument?
See, this is the thing, is that it actually wasn't. That was kind of a coincidental thing. I just wanted to, I was looking up dinosaurs not dinosaurs molting, but birds molting, because I was just curious, like, what it looks like when birds are regrowing their feathers, and I was like, it'd be really cool to see the father T-Rex covered in feathers. It'd be terrifying. It's just like a T-Rex covered in tiny little spiky protrusions. What's not to love about that? But yeah, people want to say, oh well, T-Rexes totally had feathers, just the skin impressions are from when they molted their feathers. And I'd be like, well, I made that up in a book, but if it lets you sleep at night after reading it, and it lets you accept the idea of a Tyrannosaurus having feathers and not having feathers, and whatever it takes.
And in the context of your story, you actually provided a sort of biological reason for it actually to be there. It's not just there to be there. There's actually some sort of biological reason that it's there. It could be, I think you may have mentioned, maybe when a T-Rex is going through its equivalent of must, which is a state that male elephants go into prior to mating season. Yeah. Essentially, the father T-Rex goes through mating season with the female T-Rex, and part of that is just molting his feathers. And I had never intended to make that as a compromise, but I'm grateful because it kind of is its own compromise. It was just an accidental compromise, which is probably the best kind there is. So basically, the male T-Rex is going through must, for lack of a better word. Yeah, definitely for lack of a better word. It's not, a mammalian thing, but it's definitely a large, aggressive, intelligent animal that, has to behave a masculine way during mating season, the way that most birds do, or most stags do, or most elephants do. It's just constantly taking inspiration from surviving animals and then trying to accept the fact that you'll never actually see a living dinosaur and be able to relate their behavior to these modern day animals. You can only ever be like, oh, what if maybe this, maybe a little bit of that. And that's just how you come up with your own interpretations. That's a pretty good answer. And on a closing note, since you were on our panel for the Steve Alton interview, have you adapted any of the lessons from that interview, from what Steve Alton actually said about the whole writing process into your writing of the second and book and other Primitive War stuff, Ethan?
I do take inspiration from him in the sense that he's a very focused individual that sets out to manifest the visions he has and bring them into reality, into a written word. I respect him for that. I haven't read a lot of his work yet since the interview, but I do respect him as a writer in that sense. Like, there's a lot of writers out there that kind of work in a field that I do that I don't have a single iota of respect for, because they've not made anything that was really commendable or respectable, other than the fact that they did it and finished it. Not trying to like sound cocky or anything. It's just like, it's kind of hard for me to find inspiration from the paleofiction field when there's so few paleofiction writers that actually inspire me as a writer. Most of the writers that inspire me are people like Rod Serling and Hunter S. Thompson and Jack Kerouac, and definitely not a lot of my contemporaries. But Steve Alton's still a huge inspiration, at least for what he's been able to do in his career. And he's a super genuine guy too.
Yeah, that he's always been. I mean, heck, he's got a movie out, for goodness sake. So he's actually very beating a lot of contemporaries to the punch. We're actually getting a movie adaptation off the ground, which took like 20 years.
Yeah, and he's earned it too.
And I know, I will be honest, that I wish the movie was a tad more faithful to the book, but compromises had to be made to get it made, and the author himself is on the record saying that he liked the film adaptation. So I can't really argue when the author says that he liked it.
Yep, he's the boss.
Yeah, Hollywood's Hollywood, though. Either way.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Meg movie. Real throwback to those 90s creature features. I wholeheartedly enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's one thing I can definitely appreciate for it is we don't really have enough of that these days. If you want that kind of stuff, you usually have to go on to daytime TV, and that was probably my favorite period of filmmaking, when you could just have giant animals eating people and still have fun watching it. I mean, you're not exactly looking for the most depth, no pun intended, when it comes to creature features, but I enjoyed the Meg regardless in theaters. It was a fun movie, and I can't wait to see what they do with the sequel.
And as always, Ethan, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the show, giving us the lowdown on what's going to be happening, somewhat with the latest Primitive War installments, and just talking about other random shit, just for a good 2 hours.
Yeah, I always enjoy coming on to this show, and I always like talking to you, and I love talking to you too, Sean. You guys are great, and I don't know, it's an exciting journey, and there's a lot more Primitive War nonsense coming out over the next year. Next year is going to be pretty huge for the series, because we'll have 2 full-length novels, and we'll have hopefully 2 volumes of the Bestiary, and we'll have 2 volumes of Primitive War dispatches available. So, getting somewhere.
Yeah, sounds exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Dispatches Volume 1 should be out within a week.
Awesome. I can't wait to read that shit.
Yeah, just waiting for the final updates on the cover from Raph. Some thinking about adding in last-minute author's forward, but, also don't want to keep people waiting too long.
Yeah, don't want to keep your loyal fan base and your cha-ching waiting too long.
I wouldn't call it cha-ching. Anyways, thanks for having me on, and Merry Christmas to you guys.
Yeah, same here. Merry Christmas to you, Ethan, and to you, Sean.
Yeah, happy holidays and New Year and everything else.
And with that in mind, I will be making some announcements about some of the guests I'll be featuring on the show going forward into 2019. Well, for January, I have a tentative interview planned with paleo artist Danielle Dufault from the Royal Ontario Museum, something I've been planning for the past several months now since our first personal meeting at Dino Fest in 2017. Another planned special that Sean is going to be part of will be an interview with Gary Girani to discuss Dinosaurs Attack.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, that's going to be a load of fun, and we might get some lowdown on the unmade Dinosaurs Attack movie from around the same time as Jurassic Park. And
So
something
is
else...
that actually happening, or is that still just a rumor?
Yeah, the Dinosaurs Attack film was scrapped.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was like there's a lot of urban myth about it, but as far as I'm aware, and I guess we'll get some better insight to it, that it was scrapped in favor of Mars Attacks because they didn't want a dinosaur movie competing directly with Jurassic Park or something crazy like that. But we'll hopefully separate the myth from fact pretty soon.
And probably my last bit of stuff I can really say up front that's planned is a multi-part retrospective on the old 70s cult classic Planet of Dinosaurs. And I say multi-part because I have quite a few people I'm going to try to interview. In part one, I'm going to try and interview the three of the actors from the movie, Harvey Shane, Max Thayer, and Pamela Bottaro. And with maybe the second part, if I can get him, will be the film's associate producer and animator, Jim Pearl.
Awesome.
And then also included in this channel will be the author of the movie's novelization, Alan McNeil.
I'll have to read that.
It's very good, trust me. It adds a lot of new things. There's some new dinosaurs in here. There's a brand new prologue that's set on Earth, which gives more backstory and depth to the human cast. There's even an actual, what I call a true ending at the end of the story.
Nice. That movie was crazy. I remember watching that growing up.
Yeah, it's a cult classic. It's one that I enjoyed on and off, but I'm fully aware that it has a lot of flaws in it and all that.
Yeah, one or two.
But anyhow, enough of that. I think I will just wrap things up right here. Once again, this has been Prehistory, a Traveler's Guide. I have been your host, Greg Num, and I will see all of you into the new year. Good night, good luck, and Happy New Year!